Alright, I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts. I always figured my life would go the usual route. College, career, marriage, kids, the whole stable and predictable life. And for a while, it seemed like that's exactly what I had. I married Diana, my college sweetheart, and we built what I thought was a good life together. But lately, I don't know. Something's been off. At first, it was little things. Diana started being glued to her phone more than usual, smiling at messages she never shared with me. She was suddenly too tired for date nights, but would perk up just fine when her girls' night rolled around. I chalked it up to stress or just the routine dulling things between us. I even tried to shake things up, planned a surprise weekend trip, started helping out more at home, asked about her day more, anything to get us back to where we were. But nothing worked. She'd act appreciative, sure, but there was this distance. Like she was there but not there. And every time I asked if something was wrong, she'd give me this overly sweet smile and say, "You're overthinking, babe." Every single time. Then there was the weird shift in how she talked about Bobby. Bobby, her ex. The guy I was always told was just a friend, but who, conveniently, had a history of being more than that. They dated back in high school, had an on-and-off thing for years before she met me, and, here's the kicker, remained friends ever since. I never loved it, but she swore up and down that it was ancient history. "Bobby's just part of my past, Lyle. You have nothing to worry about," she'd say. Except, I was starting to feel like I did. Because Bobby was creeping back into conversations. Not in an obvious way, but enough that I noticed. Oh, Bobby got a promotion at work. Bobby said the funniest thing the other day. I ran into Bobby at the coffee shop. Isn't that crazy? No, Diana. It's not crazy. It's calculated. And maybe I could have brushed it off if not for what happened at the family gathering. That's when everything cracked open. That's when I realized my marriage wasn't just struggling, it had been a lie for years. I'll get into that in the next part. But let's just say, that night changed everything. I should have known that night was going to go sideways the second we pulled into my in-laws' driveway. Diana had been weirdly excited about this family gathering all week, way more than usual. She kept talking about how it'd be nice to see everyone together again. But the way she said it felt off. Like there was something unspoken behind it. The house was packed with family, old friends, and a handful of familiar faces I hadn't seen in years, including Bobby. The second I saw him, I felt my stomach tighten. He was standing in the backyard, drink in hand, laughing a little too hard at something Diana's cousin said. He had that smug, cocky look he always had. Like he knew something the rest of us didn't. Diana, of course, acted like it was totally normal that her ex was here. "Oh, I forgot to mention Bobby was coming," she said with that same overly sweet smile she always gave when she was lying. Forgot to mention? That's a hard thing to just forget, Diana. I tried to shake it off. I wasn't going to be that guy, getting all worked up over an ex. I grabbed a beer, made small talk, and tried to enjoy the night. But the longer it went on, the harder that got, because I wasn't imagining things. Diana kept gravitating toward Bobby. Every time I turned around, there she was, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm, standing just a little too close. At one point, I caught her fixing his collar. Fixing his collar. Like a wife fussing over her husband. Then came the moment that snapped something in me. Someone put on music, one of those old-school slow songs, and before I knew it, Diana and Bobby were dancing. Not the polite kind of dance you do at weddings with an old relative. No. This was intimate. Hands on each other's waists, bodies close, swaying slow. And the way they looked at each other? It was like I didn't even exist. I felt frozen. Part of me wanted to march over there and rip them apart, but another part was just numb. Like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Then, as if to really drive the knife in, Bobby leaned in and whispered something in Diana's ear. She threw her head back and laughed, this soft, intimate laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. That was it. That was the moment I knew. I got up, walked straight to them, and said, "Am I interrupting something?" Diana jolted like she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. "Bobby?" He just smirked, barely even trying to hide it. "Oh, Lyle," Diana said quickly, stepping back like that would somehow make it better. "We were just—" "I know what you were just doing," I cut her off. My voice was calm. Too calm. "How long, Diana?" That's when the blood drained from her face. Bobby, the smug bastard, had the nerve to chuckle. Relax, man. It's just a dance. I saw red. Before I even knew what I was doing, my fist connected with Bobby's jaw. He stumbled back, knocking over a table, sending drinks crashing to the ground. Gasps rang out, people shouting, someone grabbing my arm. But I wasn't done. This wasn't just about a dance. This was about something much bigger. And I was about to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. Everything after that punch turned into chaos. People were yelling, someone was trying to hold me back, and Bobby, that smug piece of garbage, wiped his mouth and grinned like he'd been waiting for this moment. Diana? She looked horrified. Not in a "I can't believe this is happening" way, but in a "this isn't how he was supposed to find out" way. Bobby pushed himself up from the mess I knocked him into and rolled his jaw. "Man, you've got a hell of a right hook," he muttered, sounding almost impressed. Then he smirked. "Guess that makes up for everything else you were missing." I lunged at him again, but two of Diana's cousins grabbed me. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "Say it," I growled. "Go ahead, Bobby. Say it." Bobby's smirk deepened. He looked at Diana, like he was waiting for her permission. She didn't say a word. She just looked away. And that was my answer. "How long?" I asked again, my voice shaking. Diana finally snapped out of whatever daze she was in. "Lyle, stop, you're making a scene." I laughed bitterly. "Making a scene? Oh, I'm sorry, Diana. Should I be more polite while I find out my wife has been screwing her ex?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People were whispering now. Some already knew. I could see it in their faces. Bobby, being the absolute piece of trash he is, stretched his arms like he was settling in for a long conversation. "4 years," he said casually. Everything inside me stopped. 4 years. I felt like the ground had just cracked open under me. I turned to Diana, expecting her to scream at him, to deny it, to call him a liar. But she didn't. She just stood there, tears welling up in her eyes, and whispered, "Lyle, I was going to tell you." I almost laughed. Going to tell me? Like she just hadn't gotten around to it yet? 4 years. I repeated, feeling like I was outside my own body. Our entire marriage. Diana shook her head, stepping closer like she could fix this. "No, Lyle, I love you. I do. But Bobby, he just..." I held up a hand. Don't you dare try to justify this." But she wasn't done. "He gives me something you don't," she said softly, and for the first time that night, her voice had weight to it. Like she believed what she was saying. "He makes me feel something. Passion. Fire. And with you it's just, safe. Safe." Like that was an insult. Like the years I spent loving her, building a life with her, being faithful to her, weren't enough. Because I wasn't Bobby. Because I wasn't a mistake she could keep making. The crowd had gone silent. Even the people who had tried to calm things down were just standing there, watching the train wreck unfold. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodded once, and said, "Got it." Then I turned around, walked inside, grabbed my keys, and left. Diana chased after me, calling my name, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because if I did, I might actually break. I don't even remember getting in my car. 1 minute I was standing there, staring at Diana like I didn't even know who she was anymore, and the next, I was gripping the steering wheel, driving aimlessly through the dark streets. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. 4 years. 4 years. The entire foundation of my marriage wasn't just cracked, it was gone. I should have seen it. The late nights. The weird excuses. The way she always defended Bobby, even when he crossed boundaries. The time she'd say she needed space, but somehow always found time for him. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I don't even know how long I drove. I barely noticed the streets passing by. My phone was buzzing nonstop, calls, texts, all from Diana. I ignored every single one. I pulled into an empty parking lot and just sat there, my forehead resting against the steering wheel. My mind kept replaying that moment. He gives me something you don't. Passion. Fire. Like I was just some placeholder. Like I was a safety net while she got her thrills elsewhere. I let out a hollow laugh. Safe. That's what I was to her. Not exciting, not passionate, just safe. And the worst part? I thought that was a good thing. I thought I was being the kind of husband she could rely on. Someone who didn't play games, who wasn't toxic or unreliable. Someone who built a life instead of just chasing some fleeting rush. But apparently, stability was boring. Apparently, Bobby's sleazy, unreliable, always around when she needed drama self was better. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Diana. Diana, please Lyle. Just talk to me. Come home. Home? What home? The place where she brought me breakfast while secretly texting him? The bed we shared while she spent her nights thinking about someone else? I wasn't going back there. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I turned my phone off, leaned back against the seat, and stared at the ceiling. The next step was coming. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing for sure: my marriage? It was over. I sat in that parking lot for what felt like hours. The city was quiet, just the occasional car passing by, but my mind was loud. 4 years. 4 years of my life, wasted. Diana had been lying to my face for almost half a decade. And Bobby, God Bobby, he stood there and smirked while telling me the truth. Like he was proud. Like he had won. I clenched my fists. I should have hit him harder. My phone was still off. I knew the second I turned it back on, Diana would be all over it. Begging. Explaining. Lying. I couldn't deal with that right now. I thought about calling someone, but who? My best friend, Mark? He told me years ago that he didn't trust Bobby. My parents? They loved Diana. Telling them would feel too real, like speaking the words out loud would make it sink in even deeper. So I just sat there. Alone. At some point, exhaustion hit me. I needed a place to crash, but there was no way in hell I was going back home. That house didn't feel like mine anymore. It was just a place filled with lies. That's when I remembered, Mark had an extra room. I started the car and drove, my hands still trembling against the wheel. When I showed up at Mark's place at 1 a.m., he took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Dude, what happened?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. It felt too big to say. He must have seen it on my face because he sighed and said, "All right. Beer first, then you talk." I sat on his couch, beer in hand, staring at the floor while he waited. Finally, I exhaled and said it. "She cheated." Mark didn't react right away. He just blinked, like he was processing it. Then he said, "Diana." I nodded. "With Bobby." That got a reaction. His whole face twisted with anger. "That smug, are you kidding me?" I shook my head. "For 4 years." Mark shot up from his chair. 4 years. Yeah. He started pacing, running a hand through his hair. I freaking knew it. "I told you, man. I told you Bobby was a snake." But 4 years. Jesus. I felt drained, empty, like I had nothing left to give. I should have listened. Mark sat back down, shaking his head. "No, man. Don't do that. This isn't on you. It's on her. And that lowlife piece of trash." We sat there in silence for a minute. Then Mark asked, "So what now?" I exhaled. "I don't know. I really didn't. My whole life had just imploded. My marriage, my home, everything I thought I had, it was gone." Mark leaned forward. "You're not going back, right?" I hesitated. Not because I wanted to, but because part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. I'd built my whole life around Diana. Just walking away felt insane. But staying? Staying would mean living in a lie. "No," I said finally. "I'm done." Mark nodded. "Good. Stay here as long as you need. And if Bobby ever shows his face again, you tell me first." I almost smiled at that. Almost. For the first time all night, I felt something other than rage or heartbreak. I felt sure. I wasn't going back. I woke up on Mark's couch feeling like absolute garbage. For a brief second, in that hazy moment between sleep and waking, I forgot everything. Then it all came crashing back. Diana, Bobby, for years. My stomach twisted, and I sat up with a groan, rubbing my face like that would somehow wipe away the mess my life had just become. Mark was already up, sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee. He gave me a look as I dragged myself off the couch. Rough night. I let out a bitter laugh. Something like that. Then my phone buzzed. I'd turned it off the night before, not wanting to deal with Diana, but apparently, she hadn't taken the hint. I glanced at the screen. 17 missed calls. 32 messages. All from her. Mark noticed and raised an eyebrow. You gonna answer that? I shook my head, scrolling through the texts instead. At first, it was the usual, Lyle please. Talk to me. I need to explain. Where are you? Please don't do this. You don't understand the full story. Then, when I didn't respond, the tone changed. So you're just going to run away like a coward? You don't even have the decency to talk to your wife? Fine. If this is how you handle things, maybe I was right about you all along. I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone a little too tight. Right about me? That was rich, coming from someone who spent 4 years lying straight to my face. I tossed the phone onto the counter, too angry to look at it anymore. She doesn't even feel bad, I muttered. Mark snorted. Of course not. Diana doesn't feel bad that she cheated, she feels bad that she got caught. And he was right. If Bobby hadn't run his mouth, she would have gone home with me that night, kissed me like nothing happened, and kept sneaking around. That thought made me feel sick. Mark took a sip of his coffee. What's the plan? I exhaled slowly. I need to get my stuff. I can't just leave my whole life there. Mark didn't hesitate. I'm coming with you. I almost told him I could handle it, but the thought of walking into that house alone, facing Diana alone, dealing with whatever manipulative nonsense she was going to pull, it made my skin crawl. I didn't trust myself not to fall for it. Yeah, I said. I think that's a good idea. Pulling up to the house felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out. Just yesterday, this was home. Now, it was just a place full of lies. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I stared at the front door. Mark sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, watching me carefully. You good? He asked. No. But I nodded anyway. Let's get this over with. We stepped out, and before I could even knock, the door swung open. Diana stood there, eyes red and puffy like she'd been crying for hours. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. Maybe she thought that would soften me. Maybe she thought I'd see her like that and forget what she did. Lyle, her voice cracked, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. I'm here for my stuff, I said, my tone flat. No anger, no emotion. I wasn't giving her that. Her face twisted like she wanted to argue, but she knew better. She glanced at Mark like he was an intruder in her home. Does he really have to be here? Mark didn't even blink. Yeah, I do. Diana exhaled sharply and stepped aside. Fine. But can we talk after? I ignored her and headed upstairs. Everything felt different, colder, like the walls themselves knew what she had done. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing. Clothes, essentials, whatever I could fit. I wasn't staying long. Diana followed me in. Lyle, please. Just listen. I kept packing. She stepped closer. It wasn't just some meaningless fling. Bobby. I slammed the suitcase shut so hard she flinched. Don't say his name. Her eyes filled with tears. I know you hate me right now, but I never wanted this to happen like this. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. 4 years, Diana. 4. If you never wanted to hurt me, you would have stopped. But you didn't. Her lip trembled, and for a second, she looked like she might break down completely. I was going to tell you. I zipped up the suitcase and turned to face her. When? Another year? After you got bored of him? After I caught you in bed together? She wiped at her face, shaking her head. You don't understand. I cut her off. No, Diana. You don't understand. This is done. Mark appeared in the doorway. Everything good here? I nodded, grabbing my bag. Yeah. I'm done. Diana let out a small sob. Lyle, please. I walked past her without another word. There was nothing left to say. Mark and I left, and as we pulled away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That wasn't my home anymore. The drive back to Mark's place was quiet. He kept looking over at me like he was waiting for me to break, but I just stared out the window, gripping the door handle so tight my knuckles turned white. I felt empty, numb, like I had just walked away from a life that wasn't even mine anymore. Maybe it never really was. Everything I had built with Diana, years of trust, love, and effort, had just been reduced to a single suitcase sitting in the back seat. Mark finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "She tried to pull something, didn't she?" I let out a breath and shook my head. "She wanted to talk. Said she was going to tell me." He scoffed. "Yeah, right. Probably after she got bored of Bobby, or when she finally felt guilty, if that's even possible for her." I didn't respond. I didn't want to talk about Diana anymore, but she refused to let me go that easily. My phone buzzed again. I already knew who it was. "Diana, I can't believe you just walked away like that. Diana, we need to talk, Lyle. This isn't how it's supposed to end. Diana, I love you. I never stopped loving you." I let out a bitter laugh. She really thought she could love me while sneaking around with Bobby for 4 years? She wanted to keep me as the safe, reliable husband while she chased after whatever thrill Bobby gave her. It made me sick. Mark must have noticed my expression because he shook his head. "Let me guess. She's still trying to make herself the victim." I tossed my phone onto the dashboard, too angry to keep looking at it. "She doesn't get it. She thinks I owe her some kind of closure. She's just mad she lost control," Mark said, gripping the wheel. "You were supposed to stay. Be the safe choice while she kept screwing around. And the worst part? He was right." I clenched my jaw, my body tense with frustration. I should have hit Bobby harder. Mark smirked. "There's still time." For a second, I almost laughed. Almost. But the anger was still there, burning under the surface. Bobby wasn't just some mistake Diana made, he was deliberate. He hung around like a parasite, and Diana let him, knowing exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just some moment of weakness. This was planned, for 4 years. The texts kept coming, one after another, but I didn't look. I couldn't. Not now. When Mark pulled into his driveway, he turned off the car and gave me a look. "You gonna block her?" I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the block button. I wanted to. I needed to. But a small twisted part of me wanted to see what else she had to say. I wanted to watch her squirm, to see how far she'd go to justify this. Instead, I just shoved the phone in my pocket and exhaled. "Not yet." Mark didn't push. He just nodded. "Stay as long as you need. And if Bobby shows up? I'll handle it." I almost smiled at that. Almost. For now, I was out. But this wasn't over. Diana wasn't done yet. I barely made it through the door before my phone buzzed again. I ignored it, dropping my suitcase by the couch and rubbing my temples. My whole body felt tense, like I was bracing for a fight even though I had already walked away. Mark shut the door behind us, watching me carefully. "You sure you don't want to block her?" he asked, kicking off his shoes. I exhaled. "Not yet." "Why?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe I was waiting for some kind of confession. Maybe I just wanted to see how desperate she'd get. Or maybe some pathetic part of me wasn't ready to cut the cord completely. Mark didn't push, just muttered, "Your funeral," before grabbing 2 beers from the fridge and tossing me one. I twisted the cap off and took a long drink, but it didn't help. The knot in my stomach was still there, still tightening with every second. Then the phone rang. Again. I sighed and finally looked at the screen. "Diana." Again. I let it ring. After a few seconds, a voicemail popped up. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Well, what's the damage?" I hesitated, then put it on speaker. Diana's voice came through, thick with tears. "Lyle, please. Just talk to me. I know you're angry, but this isn't how we end. I need to explain. There's so much you don't understand. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. Please, just come home so we can talk." Mark rolled his eyes. There it is. She's in full damage control mode. I stared at the phone, feeling nothing. No anger, no sadness, just exhaustion. "She doesn't get it," I muttered. Mark leaned back. "Oh, she gets it. She's just hoping she can still manipulate you into staying." I ran a hand through my hair. "I just don't get it. If she really loved me, why do this? Why not leave before it got this bad? Mark sighed. Because she wanted both. You, the stable, loyal husband. And Bobby, the passion she claims you don't give her. She never thought you'd find out, man. And now that you have, she's panicking. I knew he was right. Diana wasn't sorry for cheating. She was sorry for getting caught. Another buzz. Another text. Diana, I'm coming over. My grip tightened on the phone. She says she's coming here. Mark's expression darkened. Hell no. You don't need to deal with that right now. I was about to agree, but before I could, there was a knock at the door. Mark and I locked eyes. No way, he muttered, getting up. He peeked through the window, cursed under his breath, and turned to me. It's her. A part of me had expected this. Diana was relentless when she wanted something. I took a deep breath and stood up. I'll handle it. Mark crossed his arms. You sure? Because I can tell her to get lost. I nodded. No. I need to do this. I walked to the door, hesitated for just a second, then pulled it open. Diana stood there, mascara running, hair messy, clutching her phone in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her together. Lyle, she breathed out, eyes scanning my face like she barely recognized me. Please. I didn't say anything. I just stared. She took a shaky breath. I know you hate me right now, but I can't just let this be how we end. I love you. I leaned against the doorframe, my voice calm. You loved me while sleeping with Bobby for 4 years. Her face crumpled. It wasn't like that. I almost laughed. Really? Then how was it, Diana? She opened her mouth, then closed it, struggling to find the right words. I was lost. Bobby, he just... I cut her off. He what? Gave you passion? Made you feel alive? I shook my head. You weren't lost, Diana. You made a choice. Every single time you met up with him. Every text. Every lie you told me. That wasn't being lost. That was betrayal. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel anything anymore. No sympathy. No sadness. Just finality. She sniffled. Lyle. I can't lose you. I stared at her for a long moment, then said the words that should have been obvious from the start. You already did. Then I closed the door in her face. Mark let out a low whistle. Damn. That was cold. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Had to be done. Diana's footsteps faded, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a tiny flicker of relief. It wasn't over, not yet, but at least I had taken the first step. Now, I just had to figure out what came next. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Diana was gone. No more tears, no more excuses, no more trying to manipulate me into staying. But instead of relief, there was just emptiness. I had spent so much time being angry, so much time trying to process the betrayal, that now, standing in Mark's living room with nothing left to say, I didn't know what to do next. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. That was brutal, man. But honestly, she had it coming. I sat back down on the couch, rubbing my face. She's not gonna stop. You know that, right? Mark leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Yeah. She's desperate. And people like her? They don't let go easy. But you did the right thing shutting her down. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that one conversation had been enough to finally end it. But deep down, I knew better. Diana had spent 4 years lying to my face, sneaking around, living this double life while pretending to be my loving wife. She wasn't just going to accept that it was over. My phone buzzed again. I hesitated, then picked it up. Diana, I don't accept this. I won't give up on us. I let out a slow, bitter sigh and showed Mark. He snorted. Called it. What now? I hovered over the block button, but something held me back. Not because I wanted to talk to her, not because I wanted to fix anything, but because I knew once I cut her off completely, she'd find another way to reach me. She'd show up at my job, start calling my family, maybe even drag Bobby into it just to mess with me. I don't know, I admitted. Blocking her feels like the obvious move, but if I do, she's just gonna find another way to get in my head. Mark thought for a second. Then don't block her yet. Let her keep texting. Let her think you're reading it. If she thinks she still has a chance to convince you, she might not escalate. I hated how much sense that made. Diana thrived on control. If she felt like she still had a grip on me, she'd keep trying instead of doing something drastic. I exhaled and tossed the phone onto the table. Fine. I'll leave it for now. But if she shows up again, I swear to God. Mark smirked. If she shows up again, I'll handle it. For the first time in days, I actually smiled. A small one, but still. The rest of the night felt weirdly normal. We ordered pizza, had a couple of beers, and for a few hours, I almost forgot about everything. Almost. But every time my phone lit up with another notification, the knot in my stomach came right back. Diana wasn't done. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. For the first time in days, sleep finally came, not peacefully, but in the kind of exhaustion-induced blackout where dreams didn't exist. When morning arrived, the apartment was quiet, and for a fleeting second, everything felt normal. No tension, no heartbreak, just the early light filtering through the blinds. But the moment my eyes landed on my phone, reality came crashing back. 37 unread messages. Scrolling through them, the same pattern repeated. At first, Diana played the nostalgic angle, bringing up memories, reminding me of the life we built together, as if replaying the good times could erase the 4 years she had spent betraying me. Then came the apologies, wrapped in excuses, in declarations that she never meant to hurt me, that she was caught up in something bigger than she could control. The desperation was thick in her words, an obvious attempt to keep a hold on me, to convince me that what she did wasn't as bad as it seemed. As the messages went on, the guilt-tripping started. She painted herself as lost, confused, someone who made a single mistake and was now suffering because of it. But it wasn't a mistake. It was 4 years of choices, deliberate and selfish, each one taking me further away from the person I thought I was married to. Then came the shift. A new name entered the conversation, one I wasn't ready to deal with, Bobby. She had spoken to him. That alone was enough to set my teeth on edge, but it got worse. According to her, Bobby had painted himself as the victim, twisting the events of that night to make it seem like I was the one who had gone too far. He told her how I attacked him, how I lost control, and suddenly, the narrative wasn't about what he had done, it was about what I had done. And then, the final insult. She claimed Bobby wanted to talk. That he wanted to clear the air between us. As if a conversation with a man who had helped destroy my marriage would do anything but fuel the rage simmering under my skin. The audacity was almost laughable. Almost. I stared at the message for a long time, my grip tightening around the phone. The idea that Bobby wanted to clear the air was almost too ridiculous to process. After 4 years of sneaking around, after humiliating me in front of everyone, after smirking while confessing to the affair, now he wanted to talk? As if we were just two old friends with a misunderstanding? Diana had always been manipulative in subtle ways, but this was something else. This wasn't just her trying to apologize or make excuses. This was her testing the waters, trying to see if she could still control the narrative. If she could shift the blame away from herself and onto me. Maybe in her mind, if I did talk to Bobby, it would prove that I wasn't the victim here. Maybe she thought she could still twist this into something where I was somehow responsible for what she did. The worst part? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again, pushing me towards something I knew wasn't smart. Because deep down, I wanted to see Bobby. I wanted him to look me in the eye and say all of this to my face, to see if he still had that smug grin when he didn't have Diana or the safety of a party crowd around him. I set the phone down before I did something stupid, but the damage was already done. The day had barely started, and I was already on edge. Mark came back from work a few hours later, dropping his keys on the counter and glancing at me. He didn't need to ask if Diana had reached out, he already knew. He sighed, grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, and slid one across the table toward me. "You look like you're about to punch a hole in the wall," he muttered. I exhaled sharply. She talked to Bobby. That got his attention. His expression darkened as he took a sip of his beer, waiting for me to continue. I told him about the messages, about how Bobby was now playing the victim, spinning the story so that I was the unstable one. I watched as Mark's grip on his bottle tightened, his jaw clenching with the same frustration I felt. He didn't even try to hide it. That little, he stopped himself, shaking his head. Of course he wants to talk. He doesn't want to clear the air. He wants to clear his name. I already knew that. Bobby had been playing games with people's emotions for years, and I had been too blind to see it. But now, with nothing left to hide, he was doing what he did best, manipulating the situation to make himself look like the reasonable one, while I was the jealous, violent husband who just couldn't handle the truth. Mark leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Tell me you're not actually considering meeting him." I shook my head, but part of me was considering it, even if I knew it was the wrong move. I wanted to hear what he had to say, not because I thought it would make a difference, but because some twisted part of me needed to see how far he'd take this. I needed to hear his excuses, his justifications, his pathetic attempts to act like this was just some unfortunate situation instead of something he had actively pursued for years. But deep down, I knew how it would end. If I saw Bobby again, I wouldn't just be talking. And that was exactly what he wanted. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Bobby wasn't asking to clear the air, he was setting a trap. He wanted control, wanted to shift the power dynamic back in his favor. Maybe he thought if we talked, I'd somehow see things his way. Maybe he wanted to gloat, to rub it in one more time now that the damage was done. Or maybe, just maybe, he was hoping I'd lose it again, give him another excuse to play the victim. But no matter his angle, one thing was clear, he wasn't done messing with me. I spent the rest of the evening trying to shake it off, but the anger clung to me like a weight. Mark could tell. He didn't say much, just stayed nearby, making sure I wasn't about to do something stupid. I kept ignoring Diana's messages, but they kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. She wasn't just trying to get me to talk to her anymore, she was begging. "Lyle, please. Just hear him out. Bobby is willing to meet up and be civil. Why can't you? This doesn't have to end in hate. We were happy once, weren't we?" That last one hit different. It wasn't just manipulation, it was a reminder of what she had stolen from me. For years of lies, all while pretending to be my wife, all while pretending to love me the same way I loved her. And now she wanted to talk? To make this some kind of peaceful resolution? I put my phone down, breathing deep. I had a choice. I could walk away completely, block her, let her and Bobby rot in the mess they made. Or I could go meet Bobby, see what his game was, and finally put an end to this on my own terms. I already knew which one I was going to pick. Because I wasn't done either. I don't know what I expected to get out of this. Maybe some kind of closure, maybe a chance to look Bobby in the face and see if he had even an ounce of shame. Or maybe I just wanted the excuse to hit him again. Either way, I agreed. I sent Diana a short message, no emotion, no extra words. "Tell him I'll meet him. One time. Then we're done." I didn't tell Mark. He would have tried to stop me, or worse, come with me, and as much as I appreciated him having my back, this was something I needed to do alone. Bobby chose some neutral coffee shop, like we were two old friends catching up. The arrogance of that alone almost made me turn the car around. But I didn't. I had to see it through. When I walked in, Bobby was already there, sitting at a small table in the back, acting casual, like this wasn't completely insane. He spotted me, lifted his coffee cup in some pathetic greeting, and gave me that same smirk he always had, the one that made me want to knock his teeth out. I sat down across from him, folding my arms. I didn't order anything. Didn't see the point. For a second, neither of us spoke. He just studied me, like he was trying to figure out what kind of mood I was in. Then he sighed, shaking his head. "Man, this got out of hand, didn't it?" I stared at him, expression blank. 4 years, Bobby. He had the audacity to look annoyed, like I was dragging this out longer than necessary. "Look, I know it sounds bad." I almost laughed. "Sounds bad? But you have to understand, this wasn't about hurting you," he continued. "Diana and I, we just had a connection. Something we never really lost. And I think deep down, you always knew that. That was it." The moment I realized this wasn't an apology. Bobby wasn't here to make amends, he was here to justify. My hands curled into fists under the table. "You've been screwing my wife behind my back for 4 years, and you want me to believe it wasn't about me?" Bobby shrugged, like this was some unfortunate situation he just happened to get caught up in. "I didn't force her, Lyle. She kept coming back to me. What does that tell you?" I breathed in slow, controlling the rage clawing its way up my throat. "It tells me you're a piece of trash who couldn't let go." He leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was trying to be reasonable. "Come on, man. You had to have seen the signs. Diana wasn't happy with you. Something in my chest snapped. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. You don't get to tell me what my wife felt. Bobby smirked again, shaking his head. Not your wife anymore. That did it. The chair scraped against the floor as I shot up, towering over him. The smugness on his face flickered, just for a second, just long enough for me to see it, the doubt, the realization that maybe he had pushed too far. I leaned in close, my voice low, controlled. You wanted to meet? Fine. Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna stay away from me. You're gonna stay away from my life. You already took my marriage. You don't get anything else. Bobby didn't move, but I could see his jaw tighten. He wasn't as confident as he wanted me to think. I straightened, stepping back. We're done. And just like that, I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting there, for once with nothing to say. I had come looking for closure. I didn't get it. But I got something better. The confirmation that Bobby was nothing. And I was finally free. The moment I stepped outside, the weight in my chest loosened. The cold air hit my face, sharp and grounding, like a reset button had been pressed somewhere deep inside me. I hadn't gotten the apology, the regret, or the shame I'd secretly hoped to see in Bobby's eyes, but I'd gotten something better. The truth. Bobby wasn't some great love Diana couldn't resist. He wasn't even a worthy rival. He was just pathetic. A man clinging to an old flame, desperate to make himself feel important, convinced that what he and Diana had meant something deeper than it actually did. And Diana? She had chosen this. Chosen him. For 4 years, she had built a lie, and the second it all fell apart, she still couldn't admit what she had done. I walked back to my car, got in, and just sat there for a while, staring at the steering wheel. The anger was still there, but it wasn't as sharp anymore. It wasn't a fire threatening to consume me, it was just a dull ache, like an old injury healing in slow motion. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through Diana's unread messages one last time, then blocked her number. For good this time. Then I did the same to Bobby. No more waiting to see what they had to say. No more wondering if I should respond. No more giving them space in my mind. They were both out of my life now, and that was the only closure I was ever going to get. By the time I got back to Mark's place, he was already there, sitting on the couch with a beer in hand. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes narrowing slightly. You did something stupid, didn't you? I smirked, tossing my keys onto the counter. Not as stupid as I could have. He nodded approvingly. Good enough for me. I grabbed a beer, sat down, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Diana. I wasn't picturing her with Bobby, wasn't replaying the past, wasn't drowning in what-ifs. I was just sitting there, existing, in a life that was now mine again. And that was enough.